My stepmom demanded I cancel my wedding and give my fiancé to my stepsister. When I refused, they disowned me and destroyed my reputation. But my grandma set a trap that exposed everything and left them speechless. I'm 25 years old. I work in digital marketing, and I still can't believe that my stepmother, well, my adoptive mom technically, asked me to cancel my wedding and convince my fiancé to marry my stepsister instead. Yes, you read that right. As if I owed her that for raising me. And the thing is, this happened a few months ago. But I feel like I need to tell it because it literally destroyed my family. Or what I thought was my family. And I'm still processing everything. Let me start from the beginning, because if not, none of this is going to make sense. When I was 5 years old, really little, I went to live with my dad because my biological mom was a total mess. I'm not going to go into too many details, but basically she neglected me. There was abuse, ugly things that a girl that age shouldn't experience. My dad fought for my custody and won, and honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. He was great. He was my hero at that time. He gave me a normal life, a clean house, food every day. The basic things every kid deserves, but that I hadn't had. When I was like 7, I think, my dad met Susan. She was 27 at that time and had a daughter, Stephanie, who was 2 years younger than me. Stephanie was born with a neurological condition. I don't remember the exact name, but basically it left her in a wheelchair and with some limitations. At first, everything was fine. Like, Susan was nice to me, treated me really well, and I was happy to have a mother figure because, honestly, my biological mom was never a mom to me. Stephanie and I got along more or less well. She was little, and so was I. We played together and stuff like that. My dad and Susan got married when I was 8, and officially Susan adopted me. At that moment, I was super excited because I thought I finally had a real family, complete, like the ones I saw on TV or at my friends' houses. The first years were good. I'm not going to lie. Susan was good to me. Helped me with homework, went to my school events, all those things a mom does. But looking back, I think there was always like a difference in how she treated me versus how she treated Stephanie. It wasn't super obvious when I was a kid, but it was there. Like, Stephanie always had priority, which I understood to a certain extent because she had special needs, but sometimes it felt like I was the second choice in everything. Things changed when I met Andrew in high school. I was like 15, almost 16, and he was 17. We became super friends, like those friends who talk about everything, who spend hours on the phone, who understand each other without saying anything. He came to my house a lot because we were neighbors. He lived like 3 blocks away, and that's when Stephanie, who was 13 or 14, fell in love with him. And it wasn't like a normal teenage crush. It was intense. She talked about Andrew all the time, drew his name in her notebooks, got nervous when he came over. At first it seemed cute to me, like harmless. But Susan started making weird comments like it would be nice if Andrew and Stephanie ended up together someday, or that Andrew was so kind to Stephanie. And I was there like, okay. Kind of weird, but whatever. Andrew and I started dating when I was 17 and he was 19, right before he left for college. It was like natural. Like we had been best friends for years and it just happened. Susan got kind of weird when she found out. She didn't say anything directly negative, but made passive-aggressive comments about how Stephanie was sad or that I didn't think about my sister's feelings. Stephanie had like a huge tantrum, cried for days, and Susan made me feel like I had done something wrong. But I was in love. I was 17. I wasn't going to let Andrew go just because my stepsister had a crush on him, you know what I mean? We went to the same college, Andrew and I, and the first 2 years were amazing, but then things got difficult. We had a lot of fights. He was stressed with school, me too, and basically we destroyed each other. We broke up in our 3rd year of college and it was devastating. We didn't talk for like 2 years, like no contact at all. I tried to move on, dated other people, but it never felt the same. During all that time, Susan kept making comments about how Stephanie still asked about Andrew or how it would be good if he visited her someday, and I honestly tried to ignore her because I wasn't with him anyway. Like 3 years passed after we broke up, and one day I ran into him at a Starbucks, completely by chance. It was weird but good. We chatted, caught up, and discovered that basically we had both been miserable since we broke up. We started talking again. First as friends, then we'd meet for coffee, and eventually we were back together. And this time it was different. More mature, more stable. We were both like 23 years old. We had grown up. We knew what we wanted. It was like everything finally made sense. 2 years later, when I was 25, Andrew proposed to me. It was perfect. He did it at the place where we met as teenagers. He had this beautiful ring he had been saving to buy, and I obviously said yes. I was over the moon, literally the happiest person on the planet. We went to tell my family that same night, and it was awkward. My dad was happy, hugged me, shook Andrew's hand. Everything was fine on his part. But Susan stayed quiet, like her smile didn't reach her eyes, and Stephanie started crying and went to her room. Susan told us that Stephanie wasn't feeling well and that it was better if we left, but I knew exactly what was happening. The next few days were weird. Stephanie wouldn't talk to me. Susan was distant, and I started to feel this horrible tension in the house. A week after the engagement, Stephanie had a severe anxiety attack, and they had to take her to the hospital. Susan blamed me, said I knew how Stephanie felt about Andrew and that I had chosen to marry him anyway, as if I were a horrible person for getting engaged to the man I loved. It was at that moment that I decided to move out. Andrew and I rented an apartment together. We were getting married in 3 months anyway, so we just accelerated the plans to live together. My dad tried to convince me not to leave, said Susan was stressed about Stephanie and that things would calm down, but I was already fed up. I left, and honestly, it was a relief to be out of that house. Andrew and I started planning the wedding. It was something small, like 50 people, nothing extravagant because we didn't have much money. I invited Susan and Stephanie obviously because, I don't know, I guess I thought that with time they would accept it. My dad was super involved in the plans, helped me with what he could, and I felt like at least he was happy for me. 2 days before the wedding, 2 days, Susan came to my apartment. She knocked on the door at like 10 inches the morning, and when I opened, she looked serious, uncomfortable. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said we needed to talk. Andrew was at work, so we were alone. We sat in the living room, and what happened next, I still can't fully process. Susan told me, just like that, with no preamble, that I needed to cancel the wedding. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. Like what? But she was super serious. She told me that Stephanie was devastated, that she had been depressed since Andrew and I got back together, and that as her older sister, I should think of her first. I told her I was sorry, that it wasn't my intention to hurt Stephanie, but that I was going to marry Andrew because I loved him and he loved me. And then Susan said something I'll never forget. She told me that I owed her this, that she had taken me out of a horrible situation when I was a child, that she had given me a home, a family, education, everything, and that it was time for me to return the favor. The favor was to cancel my wedding and convince Andrew that instead of marrying me, he should marry Stephanie. Literally. Those were her words. She said Andrew was kind, that he would probably agree if I asked him, and that this would make Stephanie happy and give her a life she deserved, but would probably never have because of her condition. I sat there, unable to speak for like a full minute. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her if she was serious, and she said yes, that she had thought about it a lot and that it was the right thing, that I was young, that I would find someone else, but that for Stephanie, Andrew was her only chance to have a husband, a normal life. I got angry. I got angry like never before in my life. I told her she was completely crazy if she thought I was going to do that Andrew was my fiancé, that we were getting married in 2 days, and that I couldn't believe she was asking me this. I told her to leave my house, and that if she didn't want to come to the wedding, it was her decision, but that I wasn't going to cancel anything. Susan got furious, started yelling that I was ungrateful, that after everything she had done for me, I couldn't do her this small favor, that I was a bad sister, a bad daughter. I basically told her to go fuck herself. I had never talked to her like that, and I literally kicked her out of my apartment. She left crying and yelling that I was going to regret it. I stood there, shaking, crying, unable to believe what had just happened. When Andrew came home from work, he found me a complete mess. I told him everything, word for word, and he couldn't believe it. He said, Susan was insane. How could she think of asking me something like that? And that obviously we were going to continue with the wedding as planned. But I was terrified of what Susan might do, how this would affect my dad, my relationship with my family. Andrew told me we had to postpone the wedding, that we couldn't get married in the middle of all this drama, But I didn't want to give Susan the satisfaction that her manipulations worked. That night, my dad called me furious. Susan had told him everything, but with a completely different version. She told him that she had gone to talk to me to please ask me to be more sensitive with Stephanie during the wedding, not to make a show of my happiness in front of her, and that I had exploded and said horrible things about Stephanie. Like, how dare she ask me to consider a cripple on my special day? She said I had said that Stephanie was a burden, that she would never find a husband because nobody wants to be with someone in a wheelchair. Horrible things that I never said or would think. My dad was yelling at me, calling me a monster, telling me he didn't recognize me. I tried to explain the truth, but he wouldn't let me talk. He just yelled. He told me that if I got married, he didn't want to know anything about me, that he couldn't believe I had turned out so cruel after everything Susan had done for me. He hung up the phone, and I didn't stop, crying all night. Andrew insisted that we postpone the wedding, said we couldn't do it like this. With my family destroyed and my dad not talking to me, we canceled everything, or rather postponed, returned the deposits we could, told the guests that due to family problems the wedding would be postponed indefinitely. It was humiliating, frustrating, and all because of Susan's lies. I stayed living with Andrew. My dad wouldn't talk to me. Susan obviously wouldn't either, and I felt completely alone. My dad even made a post on Facebook, like one of those dramatic ones where he doesn't say names but it's obvious who he's talking about the disappointment of discovering that your daughter isn't the person you thought, that love can blind you, but that he now saw the truth. The comments were horrible. People from my family, my dad's friends, everyone assuming things, talking badly about me. There were rumors in town that I had mistreated Stephanie, that I was a horrible person. Nobody asked me for my version. Everyone just believed what Susan and my dad said. Like a month of this passed, and I was devastated. Andrew tried to help, but he was also frustrated with the whole situation. It was my grandmother, my biological mom's mom, but who had always been in my life, even when my mom wasn't, who finally intervened. She called me and told me we needed to talk. I went to her house. She lives in the country like an hour from where I lived, and when I arrived, she made me sit down and asked me what really happened. I told her everything, every detail, without omitting anything. She listened to me in silence, and when I finished, she told me she believed me. She said she had known Susan since my dad started dating her, and that she had always noticed something weird in how she treated me versus how she treated Stephanie, but that she had never said anything because she didn't want to cause problems. And my grandmother is like 70 years old, but she's one of those ladies who doesn't take shit from anyone. She told me she had a plan to prove who Susan really was and that I needed to trust her. Honestly, I was desperate, so I said yes to whatever. Meanwhile, Andrew and I decided we were going to get married anyway, no matter what. We went to the courthouse, did all the legal paperwork, and a week later we got married at my grandmother's house with only her as a witness. It wasn't the wedding I had dreamed of, but it was perfect in its own way, because I was with the person I loved and with the only person in my family who supported me unconditionally. My grandmother's plan was brilliant, although kind of twisted. She told my dad and Susan that she wanted to make peace with everyone, that family was the most important thing, and that she wanted to leave an inheritance to her granddaughters before she died. She told them she had like $50,000 saved that she was thinking of dividing between Stephanie and me, but that she wanted to talk to Susan first to make sure Stephanie was well taken care of. Susan obviously took the bait because $25,000 is a lot of money, especially for someone who was always complaining about Stephanie's medical expenses. My grandmother invited Susan to her house to talk about the details. She asked me to hide in the next room, which had a thin wall where I could hear everything. Susan arrived super nice to my grandmother, like falsely sweet, and my grandmother started talking about the money. She said she wanted to make sure the money would be used well, that $25,000 was a lot, and then casually mentioned that she had heard I had been horrible to Stephanie before the canceled wedding. Susan immediately launched into telling her version, the one with the lies, but my grandmother interrupted her and said, "But Susan, I talked to my granddaughter and she told me something very different. She said, you asked her to cancel her wedding and convince her fiancé to marry Stephanie instead of her." There was an awkward silence, and then Susan laughed nervously and said that was ridiculous, that I was lying. But my grandmother kept pressing, said that my version made sense, that it explained why I would be so upset. Susan started getting nervous. I could hear her from the other room, and then my grandmother said that if Susan told her the truth, she would give her the full $25,000 just for Stephanie, without dividing it with me. that I didn't need the money because I was going to get married anyway, but that she understood Stephanie had special needs and expenses. And Susan completely fell into the trap. She started crying and admitted everything. She said yes, that she had asked her daughter that, but that she did it because she loved Stephanie and wanted her to be happy. That Stephanie had suffered all her life because of her condition, and that I had had an easy life in comparison, that I could find someone else, but that Stephanie would probably never have another opportunity. I said that yes, she had lied about what I supposedly said about Stephanie because she needed my dad to be on her side. That she couldn't let me marry Andrew while Stephanie suffered. Basically, she confessed everything. What Susan didn't know is that my dad was hidden in the kitchen, behind the door, listening to the whole conversation. My grandmother had called him before and told him to come but not to say anything, just to listen. When Susan finished confessing, my dad came out of the kitchen. Susan turned white when she saw him, like literally all the blood drained from her face. My dad asked her if everything he had just heard was true. And Susan tried to backtrack, said my grandmother had manipulated her, that she was confused. But it was too late. My dad told her to leave my grandmother's house and that when they got home, she and Stephanie had to pack their things and get out. Susan started crying and begging, said she was sorry, that she only wanted the best for her daughter. But my dad didn't want to hear anything. I came out of the room where I was hiding, and my dad saw me and started crying. He apologized to me over and over, said he was an idiot for not believing me, that he should have known I would never say those horrible things. I hugged him and told him I understood, that Susan had manipulated him too. That was like 4 months ago. My dad divorced Susan. The process was quick, because she didn't fight it. I think she knew there was no point. Susan never apologized to me, not even after everything came to light. She told everyone who would listen that she only did what any mother would do for her daughter, that she didn't regret anything. Stephanie hasn't talked to me either. She's living with Susan in an apartment on the other side of town. My dad tried to maintain contact with Stephanie at first because technically she was his stepdaughter for almost 18 years, but she didn't want to know anything about him. Andrew and I are good. Better than good. Actually. Being married has been incredible, even with all the drama. My dad comes to dinner with us like twice a week and is trying to rebuild our relationship. It's not going to be easy, and there are still awkward moments, but we're trying. He made another post on Facebook publicly apologizing for the things he had said about me, explaining that he had been deceived and manipulated, and although some family members have contacted me to apologize, others still avoid me or act weird. Honestly, I don't care that much anymore. I realized who the people are who really matter to me. Last week, my dad asked me if I could ever forgive Susan, not for her, but so he could have peace. I told him the truth, that I don't know. Part of me feels sorry for her because she obviously loves her daughter and would do anything for her, but the other part is so angry about everything she put me through, about the lies, about almost destroying my relationship with my dad and with Andrew. I guess time will tell if someday I can forgive her, but for now, I'm fine keeping my distance and focusing on my life, on my husband, and on the people who really love me and support me.